Okay, welcome back. And now from Germany and the UK, Maren Krings and Neil Woods will take the stage. Well, Neil is here already, and there's Maren. Maren is a photographer and author and hemp industry consultant, whereas Neil is a former UK undercover officer, who is now a prominent international activist for drug law reform. Their talk, or they will give actually individual talks, that they call From Plant Prohibition to Plant-Based Solutions, is bound to enlighten us, as they will talk and focus on the negative impacts of prohibition and frame policing, and hopefully will also give us an account of where things can and are moving with legalization and using hemp as a climate mitigation tool. Please welcome both to the stage. And Neil, you're gonna start, right? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for inviting me here. It's such a beautiful venue as well. Yeah, so I've been an activist for a long time now, probably since 2014, and I'm a part of the Law Enforcement Action Partnership. So I'm on the board for the organisation in the United States and also chair of the organisation in Europe. But today I'm not so much representing LEAP as I'm representing the International Coalition of Drug Policy Reform and Environmental Justice. And it's a mouthful, isn't it? We're still thinking about a rebranding and website and that kind of thing, but for now, it describes what we are and who we are. So we are a mixture of people from all over the world, from different disciplines, who have come together to understand and explain to others the intersection between drug prohibition and the climate crisis. Now, we work in teams quite often because there are so many disciplines to our organisation, so many different strands, that it's really good to bring them in to be connected. And hopefully you're an intelligent audience. You'll understand when Maren speaks how important what she's talking about is in the context of what I've explained. So the coalition started about 3.5 years ago, I think, when the activist and good friend of mine, who became my good friend, Clemmy James, spoke to me after one of my presentations, and she explained that she has a history as an activist. And in fact, she's one of my heroes because she actually got arrested for hijacking a coal train and was prosecuted for it as part of a gang of activists. She doesn't advertise it very often. She told you about that, Maren? No, she's amazing, honestly. But when she was about to be convicted of that, the trial collapsed because her team had been infiltrated by an undercover cop. And so she was really keen to talk to me to try and understand the process and what had happened, and that's how we got chatting and got really, really friendly. But in comparing notes, it seemed that we'd both been thinking about the same thing, how drug prohibition and the collection of drug prohibition policies was a barrier to actually dealing with this looming crisis that we have, the climate crisis. And so I'm here to explain to you some of those links. Now, as I say, there are many disciplines within the coalition. We have Maren, who is a world-leading expert on hemp, and that's important. We also have members of the coalition in Latin America. We've got members who are part of SOS Amazonia. We've got a member from Global Witness, the Land Defenders team, all of these different disciplines. But I should point out that we also, in the Global North, in the coalition, have a particular responsibility because we represent many people in the Global South who cannot speak about this, because if they did, they will be murdered. So we have this responsibility within the coalition, particularly in the Global North, to speak out, and we are privileged in the fact that we can speak about this and not immediately get expected to be murdered, yet. So I'll explain how I came to this. I first became obsessed with corruption caused by drug prohibition in about 2003. And I'll explain what happened. In fact, I'll explain a bit of a lead up to it. Bear with me. You'll see the relevance in a minute. I was working undercover in the city of Nottingham, and I was trying to infiltrate a gang called the Bestwood Cartel, headed by a very infamous British gangster called Colin Gunn. And I just about got close to one of his lieutenants, and I got introduced to him. And when he came to meet me, to interrogate me, he brought his son with him, his 12-year-old son. So he sat in this car, and his 12-year-old son sat next to him. And they're wearing identical tracksuits. They've got identical shaved head, identical two-piece tracksuits, identical Nike Air Max trainers. That's the uniform of gangsters in the UK, by the way. No offence to any Nike wearers. It's just, it's just in UK. You're a gangster. But they were identical. They even had an identical gold chain. Anyway, I'm stood there, and he took this knife out, and he pressed this knife into my groin. Now, that's somewhere you really should never have to feel a knife. It made conversation really difficult, really difficult. And he interrogated me like that for quite a long time. Eventually, he was happy with me and sold me the drugs that I wanted, and I was one step closer to my goal. This was quite late at night, and I had an early morning briefing to carry on the job the next morning. When I got into the safe location, and by that I mean secret location, we didn't run these operations from police stations. These were run like a sort of terrorist cell to protect me from corruption, essentially. And in fact, I would use the same pseudonym with my backup team as I was using to the gangsters on the streets. So even the cops that I worked with didn't know my real name, and they were not allowed to ask me. But then I found that two of the team had gone off sick, and I was introduced to these two new cops who I'd just not met. Now, this was completely against the rules, because this was meant to be set up as a sort of secure cell with no interaction back and forth with normal policing. So I was a bit unsettled by this. And with the evening I'd had the night before, my sensors were quite fine-tuned. My adrenaline was running very, very high, and I was feeling quite paranoid. Anyway, I was introduced to this first cop, shook his hand, had no problem with him. The second one, I shook his hand, and the hairs just went up on the back of my neck. Every fibre of my being was telling me that this guy was wrong. There was something wrong with him. And so I went to the senior investigating officer, the guy running the operation. I said, "Boss, I cannot go out on the streets today knowing that that guy knows what I'm doing. I'm not doing it." And he was great. He said, "Well, I wasn't happy about this situation either, so we'll just run short staff. They've not been in the briefing. They don't know why they're here. We'll just get rid of them. It's fine." So I was happy with that. I put it out of my mind. I relaxed. I went out, and I carried on doing the job. And after 6 or 7 months, the job came to an end. There was 58 people arrested, lots of drugs seized, usual kind of thing, loads of arrests, big splash in the newspaper, usual story. But then 12 months later, quite some time after that operation had finished, Nottinghamshire Police did a brilliant job in bringing down the Bestwood Cartel, and Colin Gunn was arrested. But they also got evidence that the police officer that I took exception to was part of his gang. He was employed by Colin Gunn, which actually meant that Colin Gunn got closer to my inner circle than I did to his by some considerable way. Now, this cop, he was paid to join the police. He wasn't corrupted once he was a police officer. He was paid to join the police. And he was paid £2,000 a month on top of his police wages, plus bonuses for good information. Now, I'd come across corruption quite a few times because it was in the nature of the work I was doing. But even so, this was still a shock. But when I met with senior covert police afterwards, and one of them, the most senior covert cop in that region, said to me, "Well, look, Woodsy, we know this happens. Of course this happens. With this much money involved, how can it not happen?" So that was the first reveal to me that senior police were well aware of the extent of corruption and just tried to mitigate it by having systems like we had for the cell-like structure of the secret operation. and me not providing my real name to my colleagues, which is a lonely place to be, by the way, and you can't even tell your colleagues your real name. But even those safeguards against corruption didn't work. And so that's when I became obsessed with the extent of corruption caused by the value within the drug markets. And so I've spoken to cops all over the world. I've spoken on this topic, I've met with senior police, and there is a common pattern that senior cops know exactly how much that corruption there is and how much it is completely and only part of the drug supply, the illicit drug supply. But I just want to explain a mechanism to you, because it's not just the value in the drug market which is the risk for corruption. The value is huge, by the way, absolutely massive. Taken together, the international drug markets are the 4th or 5th biggest business in the world. Bigger than textiles. And we're all wearing textiles, right? It's not just the value, though. It's the mechanism of policing which actually leads to corruption. Now, I'll explain that. If you catch a heroin dealer who supplies heroin to a quarter of a UK city, you create a gap in the market. Now, quite often that means an increase in violence because people fight over that. But the person who is most equipped to take over that quarter share of the market is somebody who already controls another quarter share. So if you've got the assets in place already, you can expand your operations and take advantage. In fact, the police informant system is often used to get rid of competition so that people can expand their market share. Now, this is a constant thing happening all the time because we're policing the markets all the time. And so if you put more resources into policing those markets, the process actually speeds up because you're doing it more often. Because the size of the market never reduces. There is no police activity reduces the value of the market, ever. And in fact, evidence shows that the size of the market has been steadily growing, whichever the commodity, with fluctuations, but it's always been an upward trend. Police never reduce the value or the size of the market. So the police are doing something, because every action has a reaction. So what the police are doing is refining that market, allowing organised crime to become more efficient, and they have become more efficient. And what that means for corruption is that if someone expands their share of the market, if they become a bigger monopoly, or if they achieve a monopoly status, or, which is more common, they merge with somebody else and form a cooperative where they share assets, or they become a more connected group of organisations. That means that a monopoly has a bigger share of the value in that market, and that means they have more disposable income. And if organised crime have more disposable income, they will always invest it in corruption. And I mean always. Because it's the thing that makes their business efficient. It's what protects them from arrest. It protects them from the criminal justice system. It gives them an edge over their competitors. It reduces their costs. It's good investment. And so over time, since Prohibition began, really, organised crime has become more and more efficient at doing this, to the extent that now, worldwide, we have narco-states. It's become such that transnational organised crime is so powerful and has such buying power that it is far more efficient to corrupt an entire nation than it is to corrupt individual customs officers, head of navy, police officers, or whatever it is, depending on the relative value of the corrupting assets compared with people's cost of living and wealth, of course. Of course, poverty and inequality have an impact on these things. However, the biggest driver of the corruption is the value and the concentration of that wealth in organised crime. We now have narco-states. Now, our opposition, prohibitionists who believe in the system and want it to continue and think we just have to police it harder, we just have to keep arresting, longer prison sentences, more deterrent. There's no deterrent. The market value stays the same. Demand will always be served. But our opposition say, well, if you take away the wealth of the drug market away from organised crime, they'll still do gangster things. They'll still do environmental crime. They'll still do fraud. They'll still do people trafficking. Well, yeah, okay, criminals are always going to do criminal things. But think about this. The National Crime Agency in the UK produced an incredible document, incredibly detailed, well-worked-out document called the Strategic Assessment into Organised Crime. And in two of the recent documents, they make the point that the value, the wealth of the drug market is routinely reinvested into other forms of criminality. If you look at that a slightly different way, or choose your words differently, what that means is the reinvestment from the drug market makes other crimes possible. We all know if you want to start up a business, you've got to have starting capital, right? So it allows other organised, it fuels, it's the investment bank for every other form of organised criminality. But it's not just the investment value, it's also the fact that with this enormous value of money, if you've corrupted your systems and your customs, it means it's a lot easier to do other crimes. Because you've already paid, you've already greased the palm. You've already taken control of your ports and your routes in. The other forms of criminality are not enough in value to buy an entire government. They're called narco-states for a reason. They're not called illegal logging states. They're not called illegal gold mining states. They're narco-states. So when we think about that model, about how organised crime are able to achieve much more crime because of this great value in the drug markets, that's when we need to start looking at the impact on the planet. Now, the other narco-states, significant ones, Nicaragua, for example, has been a narco-state for a long time. But on a weekly basis, we are witnessing the descent, or rather the destruction, of Ecuador from a viable, highly functioning democracy into a full narco-state in real time. You can watch it on a weekly basis being eroded. That's transnational organised crime have decided to take over Ecuador, and it is being taken over. You have West Balkan gangs that have bought up all of the wood trading companies in Ecuador. They're all owned by European organised crime now. And they're destroying all of the systems, the mechanisms of democracy to stop them doing exactly what they want to do. But the value, the big value business market within the drug markets in Latin America is, of course, cocaine. So I know, yes, this is a hemp conference, and I understand this, but I have to point out that the most important drug that we need to get a control of to save the planet is actually cocaine, because of the value in it, the markup. The cocaine market has gone mad. In the last 12 months, the price has dropped over 100%, 130-odd%. The supply of cocaine, the actual glut of supply, has increased 35%. The value has plummeted. Most of Europe now, you can get near 100% pure gram of cocaine for £48. This is significantly cheaper than it was even 3 years ago. The price is absolutely plummeting. Demand has been climbing, but demand has been further stimulated by overproduction. Organised crime they're like OPEC now, because we've made them so monopolised, we've made them so corporate, we've made them so efficient. This has meant that there's a massive expansion in that industry, in the business, and all of the supply routes. Actually, the supply chain has been completely shortened. There are less middle people. It's more direct, so there's more profits to be made. But what this means for the planet is that those secondary crimes that are reinvested because of that wealth are things like deforestation, illegal gold mining, illegal fishing. It's all ways of hiding money, because it's very easy to hide money with logs. very easy. But also, it's just an easy way of increasing wealth. It's also an easy way of having power over the indigenous population by grabbing land. Once you've got the land, you've doubled down with your money with deforestation. And then when you've done that, then you can bring cattle in as well. It's the same people making the money from the cocaine, which is reinvested into the deforestation, which is reinvested into cattle. And beef apparently isn't so good for the planet either, right? There isn't enough money in the wood or the cattle to corrupt government systems that allow all of that to happen. Because once they have that blanket corruption, you can do anything that you like. Now, if you consider across the Atlantic, the cocaine trade goes across the Atlantic, and one of the most important hubs for distribution around the world is in West Africa. And it has been now for a few years. So that's why you have narco states of Guinea-Bissau and Guinea. Guinea is a really interesting one because it was a highly functioning democracy in April 2021. And at that point, that month, the Guinea government declared that they were going to fulfill their international obligations to the climate treaties and stop deforestation. Stop it. Environmental activists and land defenders were cheering the world around. In September, there was a military coup, and the democracy was swept aside. That military coup was paid for by drug money, and within a few weeks, Guinea went up to having the fastest deforestation in the world. There was a time when military coups in West Africa were arranged by the sons of prime ministers, like young Mr. Thatcher or various other people connected with money, connected to the oil industry or whatever. Nowadays, the biggest financial player that can bring about military coups is drugs, organised crime. Guinea still has the fastest deforestation in West Africa. So what is going to happen with Ecuador? There are lots of other ways how organised crime also impacts the environment, because in the effort to actually get rid of organised crime and stop the coca crops, there have been insane plans to aerial spray the jungle in Colombia to destroy the coca. They spray it with glyphosate. It kills everything. And you know what the first plant is that grows back? It's the coca plant. Because it belongs there. That's where it grew. It's like a weed. That's where it wants to thrive. And so it does thrive. But the problem is that what it means is that if you attack one area where it's growing, organised crime move into more environmentally important areas, more into the rainforest. So the more they encroach more into land that should be protected, and then that gets attacked. And it's a game of chasing them, and the destruction that follows it is appalling and threatens the biodiversity of the region. But it doesn't have to be this way. The Colombian government our coalition have spoken alongside the Colombian government at United Nations side events. We are involved in that level of work with government actors. But unfortunately, there are not so many like Colombia. There are some good noises in Brazil, and one of our members is coordinating many of our allies in Brazil and doing fantastic work there. And what we aim to do as part of the coalition is to essentially bring this argument into the climate activist space. But it's really, really difficult. I've met with senior Greenpeace officials. I spoke at their stage at Glastonbury Festival this year. But still, it was so difficult to get them to bring this onto their agenda. And one of them actually said to me, "We've spent years trying to shed our hippie image, and now you want us to start talking about drugs? Are you kidding?" But the trouble is we don't have time for that. We don't have time for that stigma. We don't have time for it. You know, my job, I go first because my job's all the doom and gloom. I explain the risks, and I'm very pleased that we'll have an expert who actually can, you know, there is hope. There is hope in hemp, and there is hope in getting control of these plants. Because these plants, opium as well, it's the same story with opium. With opium and coca and cannabis, those three plants are the biggest, most important plants that we need to take control away from organised crime. And this is urgent. Because all of those equatorial countries that I've talked about, and all of the rest, Brazil, Colombia, Bolivia, they've all signed the deforestation treaties at the COP. They'll sign the next updated deforestation treaty at the next COP. They will sign the treaties at the upcoming biodiversity conference. But those signatures mean nothing because they do not control their own backyard. The Brazilian government does not control the Amazon. Drugs, organised crime control the Amazon. There's a big road being carved through the Amazon. It doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't go anywhere at all. It's been built with government resources, and all it's used for is the transport of cocaine from the west towards the east so it can reach the coast to go over to West Africa, and the transport of logs. That's all that's used for. The government line under Bolsonaro was that it's for tourist reasons. It doesn't go anywhere. In the recent floods in Brazil, there was no money for the emergency. There was no emergency provision. Wonder where that was spent under Bolsonaro. So people suffered because the government wasn't spending on what it needs to spend on. This is what corruption looks like. And there's only one business can pay for corruption that big. Only one business. So the coalition aim is to persuade our comrades in the environmental activist sector. We're making some inroads. We have provided some teaching to the whole of the Global Witness Land Defenders team. We haven't got to the management yet, but we've got the Land Defenders team. We are making inroads with Greenpeace. We have been promised that at some point we can speak to all 4,000 Greenpeace workers, employees, and teach them what we're talking about. We've been promised that, but we'll see. It's hard. It's really hard. So I'm always pleased to come to be able to speak at this kind of conference, because I know that there will be people in this audience who will know people, or who will know people one step removed, who are involved in the fight to save our planet. Because we have to disseminate this information that you will hear today. This is genuinely urgent. We have to come together as one movement, the drug law reform movement and the environmental justice movement. We have to, and we have to do it quickly. Our coalition will be represented at the Harm Reduction International Conference next year in Bogota. Hopefully that will bring up some interesting media opportunities or journalistic opportunities where we can spread the word. That will be an important conference for us. But much more important than that will be the COP in Brazil. And it's really useful that it's in Brazil. And it's really useful that we've already got some very, very good allies there. But our aim, and it is ambitious, is for our topic for drug policy to be on the agenda. It's never been on the agenda at the COP before. Clammy James was at the COP in Glasgow, and whenever she asked a question, pointing out the risks of corruption from the drug market, people just treated her like a conspiracy theorist. But I get a lot of that, you know, when I say I'm obsessed with police corruption. I remember being in Norway in 2017 and debating with a police officer who was very dismissive of my claims as to the extent of corruption caused by drug prohibition. And he says, no, here in Norway, we're just not as corrupt as you are in the UK. And then 6 months later, the head of the Oslo drug squad got arrested for being part of an organised crime group, smuggling cannabis into Norway. I didn't smile much. So it is difficult, but what I'm saying to you is true. And if you want a copy of our evidence in this report, it's also just been translated into Spanish. But please share this report around. Please have a look at it. Our evidence is sound. It's not an academic document, but it is completely supported by a lot of academic evidence. We are on a solid argument, but we have to find the platforms. We have to find the audiences. So thank you very much. And I am pleased, very pleased, to share the stage with the expert on hemp, and you will see the links, I think, because you're an intelligent audience.
Thank you, Neil. Stay here. I need to have that 1 second to stand on the stage with you, because this is one of these infamous things. You're working in a coalition together and you get to see these people on Skype and Zoom every 2 weeks. And then it takes Iceland and a Tota to bring us all together in real life. Thank you, Neil.
Thanks, Maren.
Well, I can only say the coalition definitely convinced me. Unfortunately, I'm a nobody, so I don't really have to say much. I can't really change the big wheels. But I do come from the environmental movement much more than from the drug space. And I do want to quickly explain one thing, which always raises a bit the eyebrow. So when I call myself a climate impact storyteller, what that is a photographer, journalist, author, who actually goes out into the world because my drive or my driving force is to search for the stories, but also document the stories that show how humanity actually deals with the outcomes of the climate crisis. This picture is taken in May in the Rif Mountains of Morocco. The road was suddenly gone. I was able to pass. That was a lucky one. There were other places where I couldn't pass anymore. And this is not just in Morocco. This is unfortunately our global truth, and is happening more and more and at a faster rate, because we are in a climate crisis, if you want it or not, but things are changing around us. And this is why hopefully we'll be able to connect with what Neil said, because I came from the environmental side, and when I heard about this coalition moving in the hemp space, and now I'm coming to a long time ago, the book Ages for Hemp was published in 2022. When I started it, that was 2016. I always said, no, I have nothing to do with cannabis. I don't have anything to do with drugs. This is all about hemp. It's about environment. It's how this plant is used for the environment. And I will show you really quickly how that goes. So we have B for building. These are some of the chapters within the book. You can build with hemp, but you can also do biocomposites with hemp. You can do, what's that, food with hemp, or from hemp. You can do textiles. You can do phytoremediation. That is what we heard quite a bit about this morning from Jeremy Hale, but also his previous speaker. You can actually clean toxins, you can clean heavy metals from the soil with this plant. That's pretty amazing. And you can do tree-free paper, which for me was a big thing, because I said, as a photographer, this was my 4th book. I know how much paper goes into these specialized, usually pretty big, kind of coffee table books. This isn't. This is also one of the decisions why I went as a photographer a much smaller, didn't really get thinner, but it definitely got smaller in size, for a smaller format, but it's still using a ton of paper. And every time we use paper, we are also part of the deforestation, not for drugs, but for other reasons. And that's where the story pairs. And this is the part that actually really made my link to the coalition. So running around for years after the book was published, being invited suddenly to climate conferences, to universities, to spaces that I didn't really expect to be going to with this mission of basically propagating hemp for climate mitigation, I realized it's all about the donut economy from Kate Raworth in the UK. We have an outer ceiling, the planetary boundaries. We're pushing them. We're pushing them really, really hard. And that means climate change. It means ozone layer depletion, biodiversity loss, ocean acidification, something that hits Iceland right now with the fishing industry extremely. Freshwater withdrawal, land conversion is what Neil talked about. So all of these things are really, really starting to implement with, or let's say to mess around with the way we can live our life, because they're actually instabilizing the inner circle of the donut, which is the human foundation. We are doing good as long as we have housing, heating, education, food, clothes, all these nice commodities that we really like, but we don't really pay attention to where they're coming from and how we're using them. So this is my connection with the book H's for Hemp, and in that space I finally met Clemmy, met Neil, and was asked to join the coalition. And in the beginning I was a bit like, okay. They need a climate impact storyteller, or maybe they just need photos. I couldn't quite figure it out in the beginning, but the discussions we had in the coalition were super interesting. And for me, in my topic of hemp, they boiled down to this reunification. Very much out of nowhere about, well, we're going strong for the 100 years there with the prohibition of, I'm now talking only cannabis. We decided to take this one plant and make it two, into cannabis, what we call marijuana, what we call ganja, what we call hashish, what we call a drug, and into hemp. That's the friendly little cousin that doesn't have any THC, that can do all these fancy things like paper, like building. But you know what? Actually, that's a farce. Because at the end of the day, these two are one plant. They have different properties in the THC. But if you let hemp grow wild for years and years to come somewhere in the Himalaya, it'll be cannabis again, because it needs its basically body-own protection, which is the THC. It protects the plant. It protects the plant against not pesticides, against the insects. It's the sunscreen, right? We use that too. So for me, Germany has just done a partial legalization, so this is why I decided as a German citizen to use the German wall as this sort of symbolic thing, and thanks to AI, this is possible now. We need to reunify these two plans. And it is a bit ahead of time, because if we move into the policy spaces and we suddenly say, hey, wait a minute, you can talk about hemp and you can talk about cannabis, but let's talk about both together because they're one, we probably push the envelope a bit too much. But I will show you what in the long run happens when we keep these plants separated, meaning one in prohibition, and the other one that we would like to use can't really step out of prohibition, because at the end they look very much the same. So let's go to a country that we probably all know most for its hashish, Morocco. I had the pleasure to travel and stay with the clans in the Reef Mountains, with the original indigenous clans that are growing the hashish, for a couple of weeks, and it was very insightful. Actually also met Clemmy there, not at the clans, but at a conference in Marrakesh. And we know this history about Morocco, I think all of us, right? Probably everybody has either heard or tasted the hashish from Morocco. And it is still a very, very essential part of the culture there, and they don't consider it a drug. It's part of the culture since centuries. So they have a complete different connection to this plant than we would. And the question is always, why should this plant not be the same plant that you can actually build the house from? We're talking about carbon negative houses. We've had a lovely, which I really liked, the lecture on the Icelandic hemp house, the tiny house. This is the same thing, except they made it work right on the ground. They didn't have a machine either, but they did everything by hand. They just had more people to work and had probably a bit more time to do it, because they didn't get hit by these weather extremes that you have in Iceland. But if you look in the foreground, we're here now in the Reef Mountains, roughly 1,600 meters of altitude. It is dry, it is hot in the summers, and it gets cold in the winters. And what you see growing in the foreground, this is hashish. That was about 10 days into the growing season. The seeds had literally just come out of the ground. And what you see in the background, very small and tiny, that is a hemp house. And guess what it's built from? It's built from that hashish, not from the hashish, but from the plant that produced the hashish. So they're now starting to use the plant material, the biomass, to continue on. And that is actually the perfect example what we would kind of need in the European Green Deal of a 0-kilometer house. Let's zoom in on this house. This is a round house. It is built with 100% local materials. You have the earth, you have the stones, you have the trees coming from the cedar trees that are growing around. Yes, they do need to log some trees, but much, much less, because they don't need to build the whole wall system with the trees or with the wood. And the architect, which you see, or who you see on the right side, that's Monika Brümmer. She's a German architect. She lives and works in Spain, and she has been working with this specific clan in the Reef Mountains since a bit over 10 years. She's built up fantastic relationships, and she actually came there, introduced to them that, all right, you got your hashish, I'm not really interested in your hashish, but I would like to have the rest of the plant. And while we're at it, why don't we just build a house with it? So this is the first house that they built in the reef. There's another prototype house that they built that's a couple years back, which some of you might have seen it. It's got a very round shape also, but round to the top, and then you can pull down solar panels. This was a prototype house that they did it was a research project and expo in Marrakesh, but this is the first house to stand in an indigenous community being built with the local indigenous cannabis variety Baldia. And it is 100% circular. It absorbs CO2. I'm not going to repeat anything everybody else said today already, but it's a quite fascinating story. Now, what I just showed you, the house is in the region of Al Hoceima. That is the highest region in the reef. There's 3 regions in Morocco that were legalized in 2021 to be able to grow cannabis legally. This is another one of these 3 regions. This is Chefchaouen. That's on the other side of the reef. It is much lower, it has much more water, and cannabis, or let's say hashish, was kind of brought about in the Chefchaouen region much more through the cannabis tourism. So the 60s, 70s, people got there, they got there quick, they had direct access, much more accessible than the other side of Ketama. And what happened here? Completely different story. People now are buying the seeds from the United States. They're importing them from Netherlands, from Switzerland, the US. These are the seeds that we grow in our greenhouses, the ones with the big buds. Let's say less grow, more outcome. They make more money with less plants equals less work, but we're not going to talk about that environmental thing that's happening because that is an atrocity. The farmers have to invest so much money to get one single seed that they cannot afford to lose one single seed during the growing season. So what they do is, when they start germinating, they're already putting the herbicides and pesticides on there. That's actually not what you want to smoke, right? But it is what you're getting. And you're getting it because it's a whole price demand. I'm repeating what Neil said. Here the stories are meeting once again. They're having absolutely no precautions on the safety and security. They're going right straight into these bags, fishing out the herbicides and pesticides with their bare hands. I was asking them about it, and they were like, no problem, I'll just wash my hands. Where do they wash the hands? 1.5 meters next to that field, in the groundwater well, where they get their drinking water. Now imagine this. These fields are starting to grow, all these pesticides are going into the ground, they're ending up in the drinking water of these people, and it is sicknesses and more sicknesses, it's cancer, people don't have access to doctors, they're still dirt poor, because the little money that can be made from the hashish, that doesn't stay with them. The big money that gets made with the hashish, that's staying in the Netherlands and in all these reseller countries that have the coffee shops. It's not with these people. So, we're actually ending once again in a humanitarian crisis. And this is where the stories 100% meet. We're fueling the climate crisis, we are fueling the humanitarian crisis, it is back to deforestation, people are getting sick, it's bad practices, there's no education, and it's really, really sad. And guess what? All of this because we're putting one plant under prohibition and the other one we don't. Let me move on. There's more crisis to have. Yes, you're getting all the doom and gloom. War and armed conflicts. I'm switching a bit topic now, but I do want to stay on these, let's say, far away topics that are all somehow relating back to the solution of hemp. It was about a year ago, last year in August, I decided that I was going to disregard my own, I had sworn myself as a photographer I was not going to go into a war zone. And last year I broke that because there was no other way than to tell the story. How do you explain people why we in our peaceful Europe, where we have enough money, we have enough food, we're actually doing pretty good, and we have access to technology, to education, we have access to actually everything we need to get the job done, to build ecologic. But we're not doing it. But they're doing it in the middle of a war, in the middle of bombs falling on their heads. They're building up a whole entire industry. It is pretty incredible. And the reason why I went to the Ukraine is because I was trying to put a very powerful story to this claim. How can hemp, specifically, turn one of the biggest polluting industries, namely the building industry, into a CO2 sequestering one? Basically into a green industry, helping us to mitigate the climate crisis. I know we've seen some of these numbers. Mine are slightly different, but not too much, thank God. But let's look at the global footprint from the building industry. 42% globally is carbon, it's emitted from building houses. 30% comes only from the energy that we use to make these building materials, such as cement, such as polystyrene, such as our styrofoam walls, etc., etc. 50% of the footprint is related to the raw materials, such as sand. I'm repeating a lot of what has been said in much detail earlier today. And this is why this is the reason why I went to Ukraine, and I'm just going to show a very short trailer of the film. I encourage everybody to scan the QR code I will show you in the slide after, because that's basically linking to my website and you have access there to see the whole full documentary. It's 20 minutes, but it would be busting a bit our frame today. I'm just going to show you a little teaser of it, and here we go. Does that play? Apparently it doesn't. Do we have the chance of... Okay, well, I'm going to skip this. Ah, okay, yes. But it doesn't work. Or maybe this one?
Help is approaching.
No, here we go. Something is running. If not, I will finish my presentation and we can maybe pull it up on YouTube.
Okay.
It's also there. I don't know if this computer is online.
It is.
It is? Perfect.
Okay.
So, do you want to...
It seems to be playing, but it's not playing.
No, I think this needs to play and that doesn't. Can you do me a favor and maybe go online and Google for Maren Krings YouTube, and then I'll pull up the film. I'll just go quickly here. By rebuilding Ukraine with ecological hemp materials, we're actually able to meet 7 of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. This is incredible. I mean, we're talking about the European Green Deal, there's global Green Deals. We're not really meeting them. Some of them have even completely disappeared from the agenda because we just decided, it was a good idea, but we're not really meeting the actual goal here. So it was incredible to see that a nation at war is actually able to show us the way forward and how to do it. Now, please, for all, do scan that code because you will find the link to the entire movie on there, because I'm not quite sure we can figure out the problem. But if not, then we might have just caught up on the time delay and we have time for some questions. If you haven't gotten the QR code, you will find it under my full name, marenkrings.com, and through that website you can find it.
It's on YouTube, right?
Yes. Okay, perfect. And if we go to the playlist and then scroll up to videos, a little bit more down. Can we get all of them or no? Maybe playlist? Yeah. What about home? No. Okay, let's skip this part of the trailer. I think Neil, you had such a wonderful presentation, and I would say you come back up on stage. If there are questions, then we can address them now. That's actually giving us a little bit of a buffer. And meanwhile, I can see if I can find this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you both for your riveting and enlightening talks. And I'm sure there are questions from the audience, and Siggy, you will hand out the microphone. Any questions? Yeah.
Hi there. I have a question regarding the legalization of cannabis in the States. Do you have any figures of how crime rates developed after they legalized, for example, in Colorado, where they started 12 years ago? Has it dropped or has it increased? Have the gangs lost foothold and so forth? Crimes down?
Yeah, that's a really complicated question, to be honest. Overall, the legal regulation of cannabis for adult use there's no indication it's caused an increase in crime at all. And there are some other benefits in terms of legal control, which really we should be taking note of above anything else. And that is the protection of children, because if drug policy is about nothing else, it should be about protecting our young, right? And it doesn't matter where you are in the world, it is easier for our young to get hold of cannabis and cocaine and MDMA than it is alcohol and tobacco. There is clear proof that legal control works better than prohibition in protecting our young. And there is evidence from all of the United States that underage consumption of cannabis has gone down in all of the areas where legal adult control exists. So that's an important measure. You mentioned Colorado, though, because there is a problem with some organised crime using the fact that it's legal in Colorado in order to grow, in order to supply in states where it's not yet legal. So there have been some instances of an increase in organised crime activity in Colorado, particularly Colorado, as a result of that sort of mixed policy scenario that exists in the United States. But I would say that the violence associated with the supply of any drug is reduced when the government takes control rather than leaving gangsters in control. Because if you can buy a product from a shop where it's legal and regulated, and where that shop has the protection of the police, and where you have the protection of the police if you've been ripped off, that is where you reduce crime. And there's an abundance of evidence for that, an abundance of evidence. Even when you consider the changing shape of the market in terms of the dark web, where people can buy online and get it through the post, has reduced violence because it takes out the interaction between customer and dealer. It's also reduced sexual violence and the risk to female women buying drugs as well. But the dark web isn't good enough. We need governments to step up and take control. I hope that answers your question. Probably a bit more of an answer than you were looking for, but I do that.
Yeah. We're bringing you a microphone. Yeah.
Thank you. This was a fascinating presentation, and I just wanted to ask, it's kind of a twofold question. The first part is to ask whether you feel like you're getting through to police when you're speaking to the police. I mean, I understand that you're speaking to a lot of police all over the world in different countries. What is your feeling? Like, do you feel like you're getting through to them in some way? I know that this is one of the largest pushbacks here to even decriminalize, let alone if we start talking about regulating drugs, which is legalizing, is the police. They're very much against it. even the decriminalization aspect. So it'd be interesting to hear what your feeling is with police that you're speaking to. My other part of the question is regarding, oh no, my brain died. All right. But yeah, hang on, it might, like 2 seconds. No, it's not coming back. Okay.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I do speak to police all over the world, all of the time. And the answer to the question is it's changing rapidly, very, very rapidly indeed. So when I first spoke out in 2015 very publicly, I got hate mail from police accusing me of being a traitor, of giving information out that would benefit organised crime by talking about the tactics I was using, things like that. I got some really unpleasant comments, but after Good Cop, Bad War came out a few years later, I only got positive support, and now I get huge amounts of support. So there is a growing understanding and growing support within police across the world for reforms of one kind or another. But of course, it depends very much where you go. In Canada, we have huge amounts of support. But it's interesting because certainly in the wealthier countries, there's something interesting happening within policing. And it's the movement of law enforcement and public health, which is led by an organisation based out of Australia called the Global Law Enforcement and Public Health Association. And what that basically is about is finding public health solutions to policing problems. And it's interesting because if you're a senior cop and you want to get promoted anywhere in Northern Europe or North America, you need to have an answer to show your understanding of public health solutions to law enforcement problems, because that's where the thinking is going. So there is a real shift within leadership of acknowledging that there is a way of making policing much more efficient by following the evidence, for a start, but by also looking for those public health solutions. And drug law reform has been creeping into that space in ever-increasing speeds. And I'll give you an example. So I spoke at the Law Enforcement and Public Health Conference in Canada in 2018, I think, or 2018. And it's the big conference. The police from all over the world go there. There's a big Vietnamese contingent. There's people from all over the place. And less than 12 months after that conference, all of the Canadian chiefs of police, I mean all of them, unanimously wrote to the government stating that they want decriminalisation of possession completely for every citizen. All of the chiefs did that within a year of that conference. And that's how the influence of this evidence-based thinking is having and changing policing. Because that wouldn't have happened the year before. It just wouldn't have happened. In December, I'm going to be in Malaysia talking to senior police there to try and understand, to talk them through the benefits for policing of decriminalisation. I mean, I won't be talking about legal regulation, but there are benefits to all of these reforms. You know, one starting point wherever I go is to ask cops, do you think we can win this war on drugs? I haven't found a cop yet who says yes. So it's not a bad starting point for the conversation, I think. Does that answer your question, Haldara?
Do we have any more questions? Yeah, one. Okay, there's a mic there. Thank you.
My question is, have you found any evidence that there's been resource savings when they've stopped enforcing the war on drugs?
Yeah, there's loads of evidence. I could pick lots and lots of different examples here, but I'll pick an example from the UK. So a good ally of mine, a good friend of mine, a former chief constable called Mike Barton, he worked with his political leader, the Police and Crime Commissioner. It's a bit complicated in the UK, but they were a team who decided to speak out on drug policy and say, we can't win this war on drugs, we're wasting resources. And so what they did is they very boldly decided to tell all of their troops, all of the constables, don't target anyone using cannabis. I don't want to see any arrests. Any. I don't want any doors kicked in for people growing plants. I'm not interested. Don't do it. You've got better things to do. They were public with it. And they brought in one of the first diversion schemes, which is a de facto decriminalisation. It means if the constable finds someone with a drug, they're not arrested, they're just shown where they can get some help, and they get an appointment with a drug treatment provider. And if they go to the appointment, if they don't need help, then fine. It means they've not got a criminal record. It's called a diversion scheme. It's brilliant. But what that meant was Durham Constabulary could then redirect huge amounts of resources away from prioritising cannabis and some other drugs as well into other things that the public really care about, like burglaries, like fraud, like safer streets, all of these different things. And their evidence is profound. They were the highest rated constabulary for their whole period where they were the chief constable. They were rated outstanding every time by every measure. There was no other constabulary in the UK rated so highly. And Mike will say, that's because we put the resources where we needed to go to score highly. Because there's a difference between policing drugs and policing anything else. If you arrest a burglar in a community, a house burglar, burglaries will go down because there are a limited number of people going to commit that crime. If you catch a criminal, the crime goes down. If you catch a drug dealer, crime does not go down because the market stays the same. So in the original Principles of Policing by Robert Peel in 1829, he wrote out 9 principles of policing. And principle number 9 is that the evidence of police success should be the reduction of crime or the absence of crime rather than the evidence of police activity. And drugs policing, whether it's seizing drugs, arresting people for drugs, prosecuting for drugs, there is no reduction in crime. It's merely evidence of police activity. And that was proven in Durham, and it's proven in various other places around the world as well.
One more question. Thank you, Siki. Okay, 2.
Great talk, thank you so much. Very good stuff. My question is, how can we hold law enforcement agencies accountable for the systemic violations of human rights stemming from the enforcement of discriminatory drug laws, and what mechanisms can ensure justice and reparation for the communities disproportionately impacted by these abuses?
Well, I mean, that's a difficult question because you're not going to get much of a positive response by framing it in those terms. Because even when you ask that police officer, you know, do you think you can win the war on drugs? And I've never found one to say yes yet. They'll say, but I've still got to do what I'm told because it's the law and that's what I'm tasked to do. And cops will always do their best job, you know? And they're good at catching drug dealers. But is it against human rights? Now, as a cop, I never would have argued that that was against someone's human rights because it's just what you're tasked to do to try and fight crime.
The right to medicine.
Yeah, I mean, look, the human rights argument is a strong one, and actually the drug law reform movement is going in the direction of emphasising the attack on human rights and the impact on human rights more and more. But if we want to win our police over, we need to be understanding it from their point of view, I think. Yeah. And we need to find that line of diplomacy because at the end of the day, most people who went into the police, they do it because they want to do a good job for their community. And this is a good way of approaching policing. The first duty of policing is the preservation of life. And so, if we look at drug policy and the impact of policing drugs, we can see that it's not doing that. Because there is now evidence that where you have a raid and arrest a drug dealer in a community for opioids, there's good evidence of this in the United States, it actually increases overdoses. People are dying, more likely to die as a result of that disrupted market. That's the way to persuade police, because police do not want to do an operation in which it increases risk to individuals in the community. So that's the way to approach policing. Well, I mean, if police break the rules, they should be held accountable. There's no arguing that.
And they are working within the regulations that they're supposed to be working with. Well, yeah, but that's not their problem. They have to follow the, examples that, the frame that they are working within, sadly. We need policy, we need to change our policies. So take the argument to the parliament.
That's the politics.
That's politics.
What's
Of course, but, human rights, politics.
was the one last one as well?
I have one for you. Thank you for a great lecture. And I was wondering about relations between legalizing marijuana and for medical or recreational use and the opioid epidemic that's going on in many places around the world. Has it shown that legalizing lessens the damage of the opioid epidemic that's going around? Or is there basically no difference?
No, there is good evidence already from various states in the United States that where legal cannabis is available for adult use, less people use opioids for pain relief.
We have a really good talk on exactly this tomorrow. Yeah.
Yeah, so there is good evidence, and that evidence is being built upon as well. And there's evidence from around the world that cannabis is a very good alternative, especially for long-term acute pain, as an alternative to opioids. But I have to say, we need to legally regulate the opioids as well. Mm-hmm. We need to legally regulate all of them. But cannabis is a great replacement.
Yeah. Well, I think we'll leave this at that. Thank you both very much.